Us in today's webinar. We're delighted to have you here with us. I, Aisha Farheen, and my teammate Isa, coordinators of the creative team of Indian Medical Association Medical Students Network, Telangana, will be the facilitators for today's event, which is based on mental health in medical students. So, what exactly is mental illness? A mental illness is a behavioral or mental pattern that causes disturbances in thinking, behavior, energy, or emotion that makes it difficult to cope with the ordinary demands of life. In recent decades, there is a growing attention to psychological distress among medical students. At the start of medical school, medical students have mental health similar to non medical peers. But studies suggest that students' mental health worsens during the medical training. Several stresses threaten medical students' mental health, like adjustment to medical school environment, heavy workload, sleep deprivation, financial concerns, information overload, career planning, and the attitude towards doctors in our community. These stresses can lead to catastrophic consequences such as anxiety, depression, impaired academic performances, etc. Studies also that investigate the mental health of physicians in practice have shown that the stresses that begin in medical school tend to continue throughout the years of practice in medicine. Although the general perception of medical illnesses improved over the past decades, studies still show that stigma against mental illness is still powerful. This leads to many people ignoring the signs of mental illness as something trivial. A lot of us fail to recognize the signs and symptoms of a mental illness, and when we do, we don't know how to cope with it. There is no better person to advise us on this topic than our speaker, who is a consultant neuropsychiatrist and associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Dr. VRK Women's Medical College. He has over 6 years of experience in de addiction rehabilitation and community psychiatry services. He is also experienced in teaching and counseling undergraduate and postgraduate students. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Charan Teja Koganti to our esteemed organization for today's event. We are honored to have you, sir, and are grateful for the efforts you take for mental health awareness in our community.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction and a very unfortunate statistics of mental health among the medical students.
Yes.
That's not something that we would like to start with, but it's absolute truth. Even while we were talking, also I was going through recent studies. Most of them are saying that they did a observational study, a longitudinal study. They've taken all the medical students entering into the first year of MBBS, and they've taken another serial follow-up every 6 months or every 1 year. And most of the studies showed that the prevalence of anxiety and depression are quite high in medical students, which is understandable considering of the vast syllabus and lack of clarity in about, because we don't have any direction, we're just left to figure out things by ourselves in most of the medical colleges. But the problem is not just the prevalence, but also the alarming rates of people not seeking help when needed. So if not even 1/5 of the students are seeking medical help, and they're not going to a psychiatrist, or they're not getting any help. So that's more alarming, because somewhere I think to an extent we don't have much control about onset of a disease. To an extent we can control, but taking help for it is absolutely in our control. But that's something that we don't often do. I'll give few examples of what, because I did work in I still am working in a medical college. So what I see is a lot of students, I wouldn't say patients, a lot of students would come to me very secretively and want to talk about their mental health, which is okay. I understand that the confidentiality, and probably they don't, stigma is so strong that everybody is not comfortable talking about their mental status, which is okay. When I help them with medications or any antidepressants or any of the medications, most of them, they don't come back for the follow-up. Later, obviously, I happen to see them in the campus or somewhere. When I ask somebody to come back for a follow-up, they say that the parents forced them to not take medications, to not to say that don't do all of this, apparently. And most of our medical students' parents are also doctors. That is again a shame, that having doctor parents, if they are only stigmatizing mental health. So a medical student who is very new to the field of medicine, they don't have much idea about what is mental health, and they don't have the capacity to take care of themselves because medicine cost money, and probably seeing a doctor or a counselor, all of this costs money. Without parents' help, they won't be able to do by themselves. So we did a study in my postgraduate college, where the results are very alarming in terms of the dropouts of the treatment is quite high, very high. So it came down to only 3 to 5% of them actually seeking help in 100% of people who are ill with either depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance addictions. All these are quite high in medical students. um, so I'll give a small story, personal story. I think that will be more relatable to most of you. So I myself had clinical depression. This was, I think, just when I was entering into medical college. It's not because of medical college, because of my personal reasons. Somehow, I come from a family of doctors who are very they're good with their medical knowledge. So they took me to a psychiatrist. They asked me to get treatment, which I did, and I got recovered. My problem was, the psychiatrist told me that there can be a relapse in depression again. Like you can develop depression again, because once the serotonin imbalance starts, many little things can again trigger you to have a depression. I asked him, so what is the chance of it? Because I didn't want to have depression, because it didn't feel good at all. Almost for 1 year I was under treatment, and he said that 50% chance that you can have another episode. I thought 50 is an alarming rate for me to have. So I asked him, well, how do I prevent it? He said that genetically you are susceptible. My family members also had psychiatric problems. So they told me that genetics is something that you can't modify. What you can modify are modifiable risk factors. Even as medical students, we all read risk factors, etiology, etc., etc. Everywhere we read modifiable, non-modifiable. For example, let's just take stroke. What are the modifiable risk factors for stroke? Alcohol, smoking, cholesterol levels, sugar, diabetes, hypertension. All this can be modified. Non-modifiable risk factor, the only risk factor is probably being male. Like male gender is more prone for developing stroke. That's something that is not modifiable. So he told me what are the risk factors for depression as well. He said, obviously, genes you can't modify. Male and female, not much difference. But he said, how you react to stresses in your life, how you let the stressor affect you, will decide if you will have a depression again or not. So that scared me. I thought, like, should I be taking a vast branch like medicine, because which is very stressful, and everybody, all my family members are doctors. They told me that it's a stressful field. Think about it and take it. They said that. I said, no, I want to become doctor. It's kind of my dream. I'm sure a lot of you can relate this dream of becoming a doctor. And they told me, why don't you become a dentist? They also are doctors, and it's not as stressful. Which I didn't want to, because I have a clear goal in like what I wanted to become. I wanted to become cardiologist, by the way. So that was my dream, to become a cardiologist, because I knew nothing about heart. It sounded very fancy to me, that, oh, cardiologist is a very fancy term. I can be this heart doctor or whatever. They told me, like, now that you had depression, maybe you should rethink about taking medicine. And they were very firm on it. And I said that, okay. Doctor told me that taking medicine is not the risk factor of depression. Letting the stressor affecting me is a risk factor. I can take arts, I can take commerce, I can take any branch, but if I let the stress affect me, I will still have depression. So I thought, why give up on the dream when you can know to control the triggers? Then I obviously entered medical school, and obviously there was a lot of stress in medical school. Preclinical phase itself is stressful, and transition into clinical phase, that's your third year onwards. Even second year postings were quite stressful. How medical students are belittled by the professors. Sometimes it's required because you're not doing your work, but sometimes I think there's a lot of frustration in the branch of physicians itself, and they try to take it on the students, which is not fair at all. So all of that does take a lot of toll on one's mental health. There were many days where I had that thought that maybe I should just give up. It's not worth it. I can take anything, and financially also I'm okay. So it's not like I had to go feed some bread and butter for somebody. Why not shift, take something else. My uncle owns a IT firm in America, and he said that take engineering, by the age of 21, I'll take you to USA and you can become CEO or whatever, vice president or whatever of my company. And you're a smart kid. My grades were very good in school and college, plus one and plus two. I was one of the toppers. So I thought maybe I should have an easy life and actually make good amount of money and go to USA and have comfortable life. But you all are medical students. I'm sure you all can relate. It is like marriage. You can't stay with or you can't stay without. You want to be a doctor at hook or crook. That's what we do. So ever since I had no episode of depression, it's been 13 years, 14 years. He said that in the first 10 years, 5 to 10 years, if you're not having another episode, unlikely you'll have the second episode, which is good. So I'm considering myself out of that loop of depression. So I feel very good. Why I told this extremely personal story, which I usually don't tell in this depth on any platform, because all of you are going to be fellow doctors. So it's our community that I want to tell this, not to inspire you or anything. There's no inspiration here. I want to tell you that, timely help is the most essential thing here. If I'm sitting in front of you today, being extremely healthy and mostly happy and having a productive life, personal life and professional life, and I'm doing very well for my profession, all this is probably because, my parents forced me and took me to a psychiatrist. When I went to psychiatrist as a teenager, the first thing I said was, doctor asked me, why are you here? I said, no, ask my parents, why are you asking? So that was my attitude, because I didn't want to share. I'm sure most of us are in that frame in this age group. We don't want to share our personal things. We don't want to share our suffering. But I think going and seeking help is the most important thing. Timely help, just like any physical disease. The earlier it gets diagnosed, the earlier you receive treatment, the better it is for you. That's the first thing. And the second thing why I told my personal story is because a lot of people think that if you take antidepressants and things like that, you will be taking them entire life and you'll have withdrawal symptoms, side effects, addictions, and you'll have depression is like a lifelong thing. Once you have it, entire life you will be that depressed person. So I want to give you an example of that's not true at all. It is a medical condition, just like any other condition. Take treatment and you'll get better. Now, I hope some of you relate. I think few of the areas, I'm not going to talk to you as a psychiatrist. I'm going to talk to you as somebody who recovered from depression, who also happened to be a medical student once. So I think that is something that will be more relatable. If you want to know as a psychiatrist advice, you can check out my, videos. They're available online. It's the same thing. I talk about sleep. I talk about exercise. You can go check out. Let's not waste on that. Let's talk about more personal experience today. First thing I made sure was that, I was exercising every day. It's extremely important. It's not about looking good. Yes, looking good is a byproduct, it's an advantage that you'll enjoy. But the first important thing, doctor told me to exercise regularly. I knew the importance of exercise. So I used to exercise every day, some kind of exercise. I used to do cycling, I used to go to gym, something or other I used to do. Even though most of you won't believe, in front of one day before my MD exam also, I was in the gym. People thought that, are you going to become a model or what? What is wrong with you? Why are you not studying? Why are you in the gym? So people didn't know that this is not about looking good. It's about getting my endorphin levels up. So all of you, all the medical students, I suggest that, 45 minutes, at least 30 minutes, worst case 15 minutes, please exercise every day. Start your day with it, because we all need the endorphins. We all need that to maintain our attention. Most of the days we have our mood very low, no attention. Students keep telling me, sir, I'm not remembering things. It's not a memory problem. You're too young to have memory problems. It's mostly attention deficit. Why does it occur? That happens because of either vitamin D deficiency, or you are dehydrated, or you're not having any exercise. You're having sedentary life. We have sedentary life. Yes, we are not farmers. So you have to correct. You always have to do the basic things right. So exercise is very important. I want all of you to subscribe to a fitness program, probably after my talk, because it really helped me and it will help you too. Second thing, probably not second, actually, this is the first important thing. Before exercise is your sleep cycle. I think the mental health conditions are extremely high in medical students is because of our sleep cycle. I think most of you will agree with me that, we all have erratic and probably the worst sleep cycle ever. It's sometimes shameful that, I'll be preaching patients something and I'll be doing exactly opposite. I tell patients that, you're supposed to not use mobile before you go to bed. You're not supposed to wake up with your mobile. I post things on Instagram at night, 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. I don't know what kind of example I'm setting to people, but um, it's extremely abnormal. The sleep cycle is something that will make or break your mental health. So, I mean, I was a lost cause as a medical student for sleep, but at least all of you, the future doctors, draw a good sleep cycle. Even if you're sleeping late, it's okay. But make sure you're sleeping at the same time every day. Don't be erratic. Like some days you're sleeping at 9, some days at 11. Um, and weekends, a couple of friends who are girls, they used to tell me that Sunday, when I asked them, do you want to hang out? They used to tell me that, I'm catching up on my sleep, which I thought is a valid thing. You work hard throughout the week and on Sunday you sleep extra. I'm sure a lot of us do it, probably mostly girls, I don't know. Don't do that, because you're again confusing your brain to be believing that there is no day, there is no night. The boundaries are blurred. You all know about biological clock, I'm sure. We It's in the pineal gland in our brain, that regulates our sleep wake cycle. You don't want that to get dysregulated. You don't want melatonin production to get dysregulated. You want your brain to know, even with your eyes closed, even in a dark room, that this is day, this is night, and this is when he should be sleeping. This is when I should shut down my factory and go to sleep and wake up and replenish all the neurotransmitters required for your optimum functioning the next day. That is extremely important. So sleep is that. So even before exams, I know some of us do last minute studies. I think one important way for you to probably reduce your stress levels are planning a study routine. You all know this. I'm sure many people would have said this, have a routine about studies. Again, I'll give you a personal example. I had a proper routine in my first year MBBS, when I went in first year med school. Um, I was studying every single day. I was not working hard at all. I was just studying for like 9 to 11 was study hours, and I was just studying those 2 hours. So I topped the university. I got gold medal and blah blah blah. So I scored, I think, really high. I scored how much? I think 80 approximately. I think I scored 80% in Rajiv Gandhi University. I topped. So second year, obviously we get exposed to a lot of friendships, and you're growing up, your hormones, and there's so many things. So you tend to deviate a little bit from the studies. So I stopped studying every day, and I was only studying just before the internals and obviously before your mains, the final exams. I didn't top, obviously. I didn't top. My grades dropped from 80 to 75. So there was exactly 5% reduction. Third year, I took it more easy because I thought like practicals is what is important. Because my family being doctors, they told me, don't bother about theory. Practicals has to be the strongest point. As a doctor, you need to know practicals. So I took practicals too seriously, and theory I left. I didn't care much. I dropped my grades to 70. Again, exactly 5% reduced. And finally, I was preparing for USMLE, and I took too many things on my head, too many commitments and some personal issues, etc. My grades dropped to 65. So there is a gradual, persistent decline in my performance from 80 percentage to 65. Every year 5% or something kept going down. My brain didn't change. I'm as intelligent or as not. The only thing that changed is I didn't plan my studies. I didn't plan my syllabus properly. So that's what led me to this. And trust me, the amount of stress I went through to score a 65 is a lot higher than the amount of stress I went through to score an 80%. It took no stress for me. In fact, when I scored 80% and I had second paper, I had high fever. I almost collapsed there, and I just wrote we had 3 markers and 5 markers, 10 markers. I just wrote the 3 markers and 1 5 mark, and I just collapsed. They actually took me to waiting room next, and they gave me cold compresses, and they gave me paracetamol injection, etc. I thought I'm going to fail, but I still topped and have gold medal only because I planned well, and my first paper was very good. So why I'm telling this to you is that, plan your studies. You don't have to burden yourself by studying 8 hours or 12 hours or 16 hours or 18 hours. You don't need to. I'm sure lot of experienced doctors, lot of successful doctors will tell you, when you need preparation, work hard. This time will never come back. You have to study for 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day. It's going to be worth it? No. Nothing that will affect your health is going to be worth it ever. Please make it very clear to yourself. Even if you're a gold medalist or not, at the end of the day, your success and how good of a doctor you're going to be is not decided by that. I had 80%, I had 65%. What changed? Nothing changed. I think I still am pretty good at what I do. So don't take yourself too seriously. Work hard. Yes, you have to work hard, but not 12 hours, 18 hours. No, we all know that brain's attention of focus is only 25 minutes. What is 25 minutes compared to 18 hours that you're planning to work hard? It won't be retained. Your hippocampus in your brain and all the subcortical areas of the brain, they all need to retain the information that you're studying, right? Just for example, if I'm talking to you for 45 minutes today, first 10 minutes you're very good, you're listening to me. 30 minutes later, you're distracted easily. After 1 hour, if I'm speaking, I just become a noise. I don't make any sense to you, because your brain can't take more than that. That's your capacity. 25 minutes for a very good brain capacity. I'm not even talking about average and below average. So when you all are studying, this technique called Pomodoro technique, this is what I did for my MD exams. It worked for me. It's a proven technique where 25 minutes you would study and 5 minutes you'll absolutely relax and rest. You'll do nothing. You're not going to be on your phone, nothing. Go take a flight of stairs, or just stretch. I used to do a couple of Surya Namaskaras because I used to get my vitamin D also in the mornings. So 25 minutes is what you'll study, 5 minutes is what you'll rest, and then 25 minutes. So you'll be doing I don't know, 10 cycles of that. That's about 5 hours. Not at the stretch. Obviously, you should have small snacks in between, etc. You need to maintain your brain oxygen levels, your sugar levels, as in the food that you're eating, and your vitamin D levels. Water is the most important thing. All these are optimum. Only then you will retain anything you'll study. Otherwise, you won't. I see most of your rooms are dark, and you have artificial light when it's 4 o'clock in the evening. Probably all are studying, I think, except Aisha. None of you have sunlight. Not even me. I have a dark room. This is the problem. We all have our bedroom in our house where we'll be sitting and studying. Without vitamin D, the hippocampus won't be functionally active. So you won't be able to retain it well. So please find an area that has a lot of broad daylight and study in that. Some of the people tell that I sleep in the morning and the night is my best, what is this? Study capacity. That's not true. That's against medicine. We all like to study in the night because probably the distractions are less. In family, parents will be sleeping and probably your siblings are not irritating you, etc. But try to study in the day, because that is what is going to be retained more. And nights, try to rest yourself as much as you can. Even I used to study more in the nights, but as much as you can, try to do it in the right way, if not the most ideal way, close to being ideal. That will give you a lot of results and you'll retain the information for long. So I think these are a few tips. And why I want to stress about water is, you need at least 5 liters of water per day. You must have heard it, and tomorrow I'll be telling patients also, but you don't drink it. That's one thing that I strictly follow. 5 to 6 liters of water every day, you all have to drink, because the brain cells need water for it to, going back to your biochemistry, you remember you need water as a substrate for most of the cycles that produces energy, etc. So you need to replenish your brain cells with water. Please hydrate well. And one more thing is that leads to self-destruction of medical students is comparison. Do not compare yourself with your fellow student. I did that for a while. That affected me so bad. I did no better in my studies. In fact, they dropped down, they became worse, but the jealousy just continued. But it took me just 1-2 months to realize that, it's not worth it. I have my strong points. And for example, I was very good at extracurricular activities. I used to win in a lot of things. That one in internals, I stopped attending any extracurricular things because I thought I should beat this person. I should score better than this person. So I didn't go to dancing. I didn't go to my painting. I did nothing. I was only sitting and studying. I came out feeling so depressed and so anxious about the results. It wasn't worth it. Actually, I scored better than that particular doctor, particular student, but it gave me no happiness. I felt like crap. My results were out, and everybody's texting me that, oh, you did well. Looks like you topped, and it did nothing to me. I was so low. I was just waiting to sleep and rest myself. So the gist of what I'm trying to say is, don't compare. I know our grading system is as such that there is comparison, and there's always somebody above you and there's somebody below you. Unlike USMLE, where you are either taken in or not taken in. In India, our scoring is very weird. There's the first, second, third, there's a cutoff, and then you're called as a failure. So don't take all of this too seriously. If you failed in exams, it's a sad thing. I'm not saying you should celebrate, but at least reassess and evaluate what went wrong and try to work around that. What happens is, when we fail in exam, let's just say we have 6 months before we give a paper exam again. In that first 3 months, it goes into us wailing and us feeling bad about ourselves, self-loathing and self-pity, etc. I think that's the golden time for you to, if you want to waste on having fun, or building a network of good friends where you can actually study, like a good group study, or just doing nothing, or go for a trip or whatever, instead of feeling pity for yourself. Because most of the most popular doctors that I know, at least in my profession, they're not the ones who's topped, and who achieved a lot as they're young. Most of them didn't even study from great college. They studied from average colleges, and later they trained well. They had that enthusiasm to go intern or train under good doctors, and they obviously sharpened their knowledge. So this course, what you're looking at, which is the main cause of stress, don't take them too seriously, in terms of that shouldn't be directly proportional to your self-worth. We let it affect us so much that um, because you see, like, when I topped, I think all the doctors had said, like, I was the poster child for like the ideal student who just joined, and who is just mine was NRS seat. I didn't get in through a merit seat. So people usually have low expectations from NRS students. They're like, oh, usually they're dumb and things like that. But when I topped, I got more attention than what a merit student would have got, because it's unexpected success. So there was a lot of eyes on me, and suddenly when I started dropping my grades down, that was also very like a public talk. People are like, okay, it's going down, so probably he copied in the first year. There was a lot of rumors about me that I come from an influential family, so probably I got question papers leaked, etc., etc. So there was a lot of rumors. But one thing I did all through this process was, I didn't let anything affect me, because I don't have thick skin. My skin is so thick. I think it still is very thick, that people's opinions and what they think about me, it never mattered to me, and it shouldn't matter to you. Not even your own parents. If they think you could be having a successful orthopedician and a gynecologist parent, right? You might not be doing as well as them. You might be doing. You're an average student. It's very natural that everybody will think that you're the scapegoat of the family, that you're not as good as your parents, you'll never be as good as your parents. You don't have to be like your parents. They're already your parents. They're those two people. You're not them. You're only the progeny. So build your own success in terms of, do not let anything that affect you around you. What's your clear goal is. You want to be a specialist, you want to do good to society, you want to make some money, you want to lead a good life. These are the usual goals that we all have. Some of us have maybe fantastic goals, like, I want to become the topmost doctor. I feel that's not a very healthy goal, because there is nothing called topmost doctor. For example, there is no top actor. There are many good actors. So your goals have to be practical, achievable, and attainable. That's when you will reach success. Success is not you getting into AIMS college. That's not success. Success is, today, how many patients do come back to me? How many doctors refer patients to me? Not because I'm giving them some referral fee, but genuinely because they think I'm good. None of them care about my scores or how many attempts did I take to get into an MD program. Nothing matters. Like, nobody cares. So right now, whatever that looks very big to you, like unattainable, like a roadblock, 5 years later, when you're sitting as a consultant on, in my position, in the other side of the laptop right now, none of that matters. In fact, you'll find it very silly that, why did I take things so seriously? Why did I let things affect me so much that, my mental health went for absolute toss? Was it worth it? It's not worth it. Nothing is going to be worth it. At the end of the day, you have to be happy with what you're doing. If you're taking preclinical, paraclinical, clinical, it shouldn't matter. I see that, a lot of students, when I counsel them and I ask them what specialty you want to take, they say anything clinical. I neither see a passion there nor clarity. What do you mean by anything clinical? So there is somewhere you look down on preclinical. So we look down on paraclinical. Paraclinical look down on preclinical. Preclinical will find someone else to look down on, probably dentists. Dentists will look down on probably engineers. There's always somebody above you and below you. So there is no hierarchy here. For example, microbiology, nobody cared. Right now, microbiologists are doing very well because of COVID. At one time, radiologists, nobody cared about radiologists. In fact, like I talked to my uncles who are popular radiologists, they tell that they took radiology because nothing was available for them. And they hated it every single day. They thought they are going to be lab technicians because there were no patients. Nobody knew who is this particular doctor. There was no patient contact. So they said that we hated it. What changed the hate is obviously right now the popularity and the money that they get is better than the other professionals. That is probably this thing. But they still are not happy. I asked my uncle, "Are you not happy?" He's like, "No, I'm not happy. I'm not seeing patients. A lot of people don't know me that I'm a doctor. People know me as a diagnostic center, somebody who works in a diagnostic center." So every branch has its pros and cons. There is nothing called the most ideal branch. I know medical students think that general medicine is the most ideal branch, or gynecology for girls especially is the most ideal branch. It's nothing like that. It really doesn't matter. So your success is determined by how good you are and how enthusiastic you are. Even today, like if I don't know a particular drug, I don't feel ashamed, or I don't immediately Google and tell my, wrong advice. I call up my professor, I call up my HOD, I message them, "Sir, do you have 5 minutes? Can I talk to you about a medicine?" You have to be a lifelong student. There's nothing called, "Oh yeah, my MD is done. I'm there." No, science is evolving every single day. Most of them we don't know because we're not in the science, we're not in the research area, we're in the clinical practice. So you have to be a lifelong student, and you have to have that obedience to learn things. If you're open to be learning things, if you're open to new experiences, any branch can be exciting. But yes, I mean, it's something that you like. For example, I can never be a gynecologist. Like OBG is something that I never understood as a medical student also. It was very difficult for me. So that's something that I can't take. I can't love that branch, but I don't hate the branch as well. So don't pick your favorites already. Be open. For example, when I was taking psychiatry, because I wanted to take cardiology, and then now suddenly there's a shift to wanting to take psychiatry. Everybody is like, okay, there's no relation between cardiology and psychiatry. There is actually a lot of relation between heart and mind, heart and brain, which a lot of people don't know. So I actually faked myself as a patient, and I went to a psychiatrist in Hyderabad. And I told him, "Sir, I paid you money not for the treatment, but actually I'm a medical student. I wanted to know how viable is psychiatry. You think that?" He's like, "What do you mean by viability? What are the areas you think that you'll be happy with your profession?" I said, "One is obviously job satisfaction. Second is recognition. Third is money." I said, "These three, obviously." He said, "What is your priority?" I said, "There's no priority. Like there's no order. All three can be same or one after another, and they keep shifting with my responsibilities. At some point, I might need more money than wanting to be have job satisfaction. So it shifts." So I said, I was very clear. I said, "There is no order, sir. Whatever. At the end of the day, how do you feel?" He said that you can take radiology, which is considered the topmost branch right now, and you can be a horrible radiologist who didn't learn much and can't read anything but ultrasound. You can't read an MRI, you can't read a CT, and you're making only 1 lakh. He asked me, what are the tick points that to be checked off here? Job satisfaction, no. Money, maybe yes. Recognition, obviously no. So he said, "So will radiology fetch you this, your priorities?" I said, "No." He said, "Okay, let's just consider you take psychiatry. You have job satisfaction. You have recognition. You don't have much money. Does it check more boxes than the radiology did for you?" I said, "Yeah, 2 on 3." He said, "And there is scope for money." You can always make more money if you're good, if you're willing to see more patients, if you're willing to probably travel a little bit, if you're willing to work in multiple hospitals, you'll make money. So there's a probability of 3. Isn't it better than taking radiology? I said, yeah. But do you have heart in the right place? Do you want to take psychiatry? I said, yeah. He asked me, what are my reasons? I said, I had depression. He said, no, don't give me that reason. Just because you had depression, you want to take psychiatry. I said, no, that's not the reason. I want to take psychiatry because, I have a lot of curiosity in the branch because a lot of things are still unknown. We have a lot of hypotheses which are not theoretized yet. So it's exciting in terms of there's a new finding every day, and so brain generally excites me. So I either want to take neurology or psychiatry. These are only 2 branches. So I told him that reason. He said, absolutely, you have a heart in your right place. Go for it. Don't worry about success or anything. It'll come to you. It'll come to you when you're 40. It'll come to you if you're 50. If you're lucky, it'll come to you when you're 35. So I just turned back and I started, I took what I want to. Why am I giving these examples? I don't know if this is what you expected out of today's talk. I didn't want to tell the generic things of do yoga, do meditation. No, none of that. I think these are very relatable issues for a lot of us. We find ourselves at crossroads most of the time. I find myself at crossroads like every second month. I have new job opportunity, better package. That's a crossroad because you already have a client base in one hospital. Someone is offering you better money. This will happen to every doctor in their life. Hopefully, it will happen to every doctor in their life. So that crossroad is also confusing. I make myself very easy. I make my life very easy. I'm like, okay, I already have client base. Let me be here. So sometimes I think you have to take an easier route. You have to take an easier decision. You don't need to have a success story in terms of I struggled. People think that, having success stories have going through a lot of struggle, coming out of poverty and rising above the riches. No, that's not a success story. Your success story should be you're mentally healthy today. You're physically active today. That's all that matters. I think till now, I think doctors never cared about their health. I think we are the worst patients. Everybody knows this. Even a layman knows that doctors are the worst patients. Like if you see me at 2 o'clock on Instagram posting something on my page, I probably am just a preacher. I'm not following what I'm saying. So same goes, you see the endocrinologists are diabetics themselves. Cardiologists have horrible cardiovascular health. Psychiatrists, anesthetists, physicians are generally more prone for mental health conditions because of the stress in their own branches. So if you're looking at all of us, we are poster child not for the practice, we're the poster children for diseases in terms. So what I'm saying is maintain a healthy life, maintain a work-life balance, and do not glorify this horrible work culture. We have horrible work culture of, oh, we work 48 hours, we work 24 hours back to back. That's not good. It leads to burnout. What is burnout? You can Google it, you can check. Let's not waste time on that. It leads to burnout. And most of us, how do we cope up with burnout? We tend to smoke. If you look at substance addictions and dependencies are highest in our profession, even more higher in anesthesia and critical care. What does it tell you? That tells you that more stressful the branch gets, most of the people are coping with unhealthy mechanisms. You don't find anesthetists going and doing yoga. They don't have the time. So it's easier that they buy a cigarette and they go and light it in a smoking area in the hospital and they come back, they feel relaxed. So people usually take the quicker and easier route. Don't do that. I'm sure a lot of you might be smoking or drinking, boys, girls, everybody. But just know that all this will be detrimental for your mental health and physical health. We know that all this affected physical health any which ways. So do not glorify this working hard or this pathetic work culture of I work 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day. Don't do that. So strike a balance. Work-life balance is very difficult to achieve. I hope all of you achieve that. For example, every Sunday, so some of the hospitals offered me night duties, obviously with better pay, and they offered me Sunday duties with better pay. And everybody told me to Sharon, just take it, go for it, because you won't get opportunities. You're lucky that you're at least getting opportunities in a metro. I was conflicted. Obviously, I was like, okay, should I take it? It's good money because night duties pay you better than day duties. So I was like, well, should I take it? Should I take it? Then I went back to thinking what my psychiatrist told me. He said, put yourself first. Yourself first is not you being selfish. Yourself first is you prioritizing your health more than other things. So I thought like, okay, if I make A 30,000 less, it's okay. Or maybe a 50,000 less, it's okay. I can manage with the money that I have, but at least I'll be happy. I'll have time for myself. I can have time for my hobbies. So it's an easy decision. So once you know your priorities, your goals, life becomes very easy. So I want all of you to have your life very easy. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. I would like to interact with all of you and take questions for the probably next 10 minutes.
Yes, sir, we have a few questions like we had asked them earlier. But if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, sir.
So when nobody asks me questions, I either think I'm very good or
Uh,
I'm very bad.
no, sir. We had asked the participants to, put their queries while registering for the webinar itself, and we've got many questions. So among them, the first one is about anxiety, like panic attacks and overthinking. How do we handle them and, not let it overpower us?
So anxiety and panic attacks are a little different. Um, if you're talking about just anxiety as like English word, I'll tell you what to do. But if you're talking about anxiety as medical, you have to see a doctor. That's the first thing. Do not think that okay, I'll do whatever Dr. Charan said, and let's see if it'll go. It will not go. There's no way it'll go. So I think first thing about anxiety, see if it's physical or psychological. See, is it associated with a trigger or not? For example, I have an exam tomorrow. I'm feeling anxious. It's normal. I see a I see a tiger in front of me and I'm feeling anxious. It's normal. I get a call from my mother in the middle of the night at 2:30. I feel anxious. That's normal. All of that is normal. But what is abnormal? What most of us do is we sit and we think like, what if something happens to my mom? What if she calls me in the middle of the night? It gives me the same anxiety. What if I fail in my exams? And what if I keep failing in my exams? What if I will not get a PG seat? That's abnormal. What if I get COVID and what if I die? That's abnormal. So all these what ifs are abnormal. So one thing I do generally is when I'm feeling very anxious in terms of physical anxiety, what I do is I find myself sitting in a quiet place. I will deep breathe. It might not work for you. It might work for most of us. Might not work for a small margin of you. But the importance of deep breathing when you stretch your diaphragm because of expansion of lungs, the vagus nerve is sending signals to your brain to secrete the hormones. It's obviously your hypothalamic, pituitary, the entire axis gets regulated in terms of it will reduce secretion of catecholamines. The adrenaline and noradrenaline levels will be less. So even though you're feeling anxious, your heartbeat, your breathlessness, chest tightness, sweating, etc., all that will go down. So deep breathing is what I suggest. But some of the people tell me that, doctor, in such a panic environment, I can't deep breathe. So that's when you can diffuse yourself to use your sensations or senses, not sensations, sorry. Use your five senses to uh, distract yourself. So for example, I'm sitting right now and I'm feeling anxious and immediately I tend to shut my brain in terms of it's called grounding exercise. If you Google, you'll get it. Or if you're following my page, you'll find it. Grounding exercise is when I'm going to look at five things around me that are pleasant. It can be anything, try to go into balcony and see for different things, and four things that I can touch. I can close my eyes and touch and see how a particular texture feels. For example, I have a pillow here. It has a texture. If I'm feeling anxious, I can close my eyes and just feel the texture. Even the sensory nerve endings, right? You all know that the small nerves will finally go to brain only at the end of the day. Spinal cord, brain, it'll go there only. So use your touch. Then three things that probably you can smell. Something. I usually have cologne on me all the time, so I smell my cologne, or I spray some cologne and smell. Or if I like chocolate, whatever it is available around you, something pleasant. Smell and taste something. Either you can have water and not just gulp water, but slowly let that slide down. Any of this. This is called grounding exercise. This really works. But if you're talking about other kind of anxiety, that you're an anxious person generally, like you're always overthinking, then you can't keep doing this. You can't just keep doing this all the time. So I think one thing for you is to write down. I think when you put down the things on the paper, we all know that our visual media is more stronger than our auditory. For example, if I turn off my mic right now, if I'm talking to you now, most of you will not relate to what I'm saying. I just become a noise to you after a particular point, right? So because the visual medium is so strongest, and it's interrelated with the areas that regulates your mood, the occipital cortex, to other areas. Write down your thoughts that worry, right? And divide them into two halves. It might sound like such a big task. You might feel like, I have NEET exam in 10 days. Why should I do this? It might waste my time. It will only take 5 minutes, right? Write down thoughts and divide them into, can I control this? Can I not control this? This changed my life. I take a paper, I draw a line, and I write, can I control this? Can I not control this? And I put down my thoughts. As I understand my thought, I'm like, okay, this is something I can control. I write in the control section. Other side, I can't control section. Then the control section, prioritize the thoughts. You can have ridiculous thoughts that makes no sense. Like, what if my parents don't agree for my marriage with my boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, right? That might not be priority right now. Your priority might be right now to get an MD seat, which might make you independent and actually find a good match for your own self, or marry your own boyfriend, girlfriend. So prioritize them. What is your priority? Exam preparation, keeping my relationship on hold, studying, or pursuing my parents, or taking any step. So prioritize them. So again, you have a little more clarity. So it's called Overthinker's Journal. A lot of people do that. Overthinker's Journal is, you write down all your thoughts and keep striking off. Essentially, as doctors, we do the same thing to diagnose a disease. When you come and tell me I have loss of appetite, immediately my brain is thinking depression, cancer, tuberculosis, multiple things are coming, peptic ulcer, gastric ulcer, multiple things are coming into my head. So I'm going to ask you more questions to a patient. As he's answering to me, I'm going to come down to probably that one diagnosis. If I come down to two diagnoses, I rely myself on blood tests and other scans, etc. Same thing, you have to apply to your overthinking as well. Keep coming down. Finally, you only have one or two valid thoughts. So at least you have clarity in brain that, I don't have too many thoughts. I just have two thoughts that I'm worrying in different forms and shapes and sizes. That'll give you some clarity. That'll definitely help. I think you can try this.